Hi, friend. Niklas here. Welcome to another episode of the Your Audio Solutions podcast, where it's my job to find the tools and method from the people that inspire you so you can apply their knowledge to your own life and work. And on today's show, we have bass player and lead singer Aaron Beam from the band Red Fang. Now, if you haven't heard Red Fang and you're into kick-ass music and hilarious music videos, go check Red Fang out right now. I'll leave a link to their Spotify and YouTube below so you can go check them out after this interview with Aaron. It was a pleasure talking to Aaron, and I hope you're going to enjoy our conversation as well. And especially if you're in a band and want some tips about to grow a fan base and how to make a career out of your music, I think you're going to get some useful tips from this interview. Now, if you want exclusive access to interviews before the public and a chance to ask questions to up-and-coming guests and much more, feel free to check out the Audio Tribe. Just use the link in the description below and enter your name and email address. You have joined the Audio Tribe. It's free, of course. All you need to do is enter your name and email address, as I just said, and you get exclusive access to interviews before the public and a chance to submit questions to up-and-coming guests on the show. Check it out. And also, feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel and Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And feel free to leave a comment. Let me know what you think about the interview. If you have any guests you'd like to see coming onto the show, just leave a comment or shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you. But that's it. Let's get into the interview with Aaron Beam from Red Fang.
Where are you?
London,
Okay.
UK. Are you in Portland, right? Or
Yeah. Well, I'm in Tacoma right now.
like you
So
said, yeah.
yeah. I'm
Are you,
from Portland, but
Hmm. In Portland, you guys are going through some tough shit. It looks like.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, US as a
yeah,
whole, maybe, but
yeah. Portland especially though, and I'm frankly pretty happy not be there right now. There's it's gotten to a kind of ridiculous point now where it's people just roving residential neighborhoods and like protesting and yelling at people on their porches and stuff. And it actually kind of went through my old neighborhood,
wow,
and it's like, all
it's
right,
shit.
it's going too far.
Yeah. I mean, isn't the first US presidential debate today as well?
Yes. Yep.
Are you
It's
going to
tonight.
watch it?
I was just talking to my coworker about it. I mostly been trying to avoid all that stuff since I have no
Right.
control ultimately.
Right.
I just have to wait and see who wins.
Hmm.
And so it's vaguely, it's interesting to me insofar as I do expect Biden should be able to beat the crap out of Trump. And so I kind of want to see that just for, as like a boxing fan.
Right.
But I don't want to get too wrapped up in that thing because it's too depressing.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, I hope it's going to come out, as a good thing in the end, but
Me too.
it's yet to
So
see, I
far,
guess.
So far, it looks good. I mean, Biden is increasing, like his gap in predicted win probability continues to get wider. It looks more increasingly likely that he'll win. So
Right.
I will
Well,
be very, very sad if he doesn't.
yeah, I mean, I think that the world will be a bit sad.
Yep.
I mean, the whole world is so polarized at the moment. I mean, Europe, is the
Yeah,
same. Uh,
totally.
US the same, obviously, but you know, enough about politics, I guess. Let's talk about
Yeah.
music and
Yes.
and fun stuff.
Absolutely.
Actually, I've seen you guys. I think it's twice,
Hmm.
but I know it's definitely once,
Yeah.
and that was in Copenhagen
Okay.
when you guys opened for Mastodon
Yes.
at a
At wait, I'm
Vega.
trying to. Yeah,
Yeah,
Vega. What I was
yeah,
just about to say, but I
yeah,
wasn't totally.
yeah.
Yep.
That was a kick-ass show, man. I mean, I've heard you guys
Uh,
before that, but I remember you guys almost stole the show. That was awesome,
Well, thank you.
awesome playing, man.
Well,
Um,
thanks.
you're welcome. But I
I
actually
know
want,
that. Go ahead.
yeah, okay, yeah. I just want to, ask you about your bass sound because I've going back lately to listen to your records, and sometimes I listen to your bass and it's like this angry, almost like a guitar in the middle. And you have the guitarist and left and right, but you're there like in the middle, almost punking out, you know,
Yeah.
but not by yourself, but it sounds almost like a guitar. So
Yes.
just wondering, where does that whole thing, where that style come from you and sound?
Uh, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I am approaching the bass from a guitar perspective. Uh, Basically because the band started out as just me and David and John jamming together, and I was
Hmm.
playing guitar in the
Right,
beginning.
right.
And frankly, I was kind of irritated to be the person that was relegated or punished, sent to the to baseland. I was just excited to play guitar in a band again, uh, and so I just said, "Well, screw it. Then I'm just going to play as though I'm playing guitar, just on the bass instead."
Hmm.
And partly because I was just like, I was guessing, I was being kind of childish, but I was irritated, and so I intentionally wrote all my bass parts to be super easy so that I could just get drunk and still play them without any problems. But then I ended up actually now I super love the bass and actually kind of prefer playing bass to playing guitar.
Right.
And the way that the sound thing came about, um, that's sort of like more about the style of like how I play and what the parts are that I was writing. Why they were more guitar like.
Hmm.
But the sound is um, essentially just all comes from the fact that we use the same amps across the string section. All three of us are all using Sun Beta amps,
Right.
and in a lot of cases through the same guitar cabinets. I'm playing essentially a guitar head through a guitar cabinet, and it means that kind of automatically, since our guitars all sound different, our playing styles are different, it just makes this sort of cohesiveness to
Hmm.
the tone. And it was just kind of an accident. I just happened to have one of those heads, um, and the other two guitar players, their amps weren't loud enough to keep up with that one, and so we just bought. They're easy to find around Portland, or at least they used to be,
Right.
and they used to be really cheap because they were made just outside of town.
Hmm.
So there's just a lot of them laying around Portland. So I mean, I think I have, I don't know, 5 or 7 of them, and I think David has like 9 or 10, and Brian has probably 2 or 3 of those. So
That's cool, man.
yeah.
That's a pretty good idea.
Hmm.
But what was it with the, you said you enjoy bass playing more than guitar playing now. When
Yeah.
when when did it change? Was it a moment, or was it just like a progression over time?
I think it was, I think just after touring for a few years with the band and getting used to playing bass and getting used to how tied in with the like kind of the power of the band. There's so much more of the power actually comes from the bass and drums than the guitars.
Hmm.
Uh, and then trying to switch back to guitar, the guitar just feels like really small and fiddly, and it's a lot less forgiving. The bass, I can like play it almost as hard as I possibly can, and it's still fine. But
Right,
a
right.
guitar, if you play it that hard, it just like is,
It's out of shape.
chaos.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. I mean, also, your sound, I mean, obviously it has developed since the first record, but, like I said before, like, remember hearing you, 10, plus years ago, I guess. It has this, or for me back then, it was this new thing I never heard, like mix of, almost bluesy stuff, garage and stoner, metal, whatever it's called, stoner rock, whatever you want to call it. Was that how you guys saw it too, or you guys just play it and record?
Yeah, it was really much less thought out than that. I think it
Mm.
was all the only really kind of discussions that we had about style was like, hey, man, I want to play in another kind of like heavy band. That was basically it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And uh, we just, all 4 of us have pretty different tastes, even within heavy music.
Hmm.
And so a lot of the sound, I think, comes from actually kind of like battles between us for, like, oh, he's kind of pushing it a little more bluesy, and I don't really like that style, so I'm going to kind of intentionally play some out of tune notes because maybe I'm being childish and I'm just like, I just want to destroy this blues part because I don't like it, or whatever. And then, maybe somebody else will try to make something, one of us will write a part that's really noisy, and then somebody else will come up with this like pretty melody over the top of it to sort of just like say, well, that's too noisy for me, so I'm just going to add my flavor, which is a lot prettier or whatever. So I think
Right.
that's kind of basically where that comes from, is just the four of us butting heads and then just putting all of it in at once instead of just adhering to whatever the first person's idea was.
Right. I mean, I can recognize that myself having been in bands. you
Hmm.
know, it's kind of funny. Um,
Yeah.
but how, let's say the guy who brings in the pretty riff, does he get mad if you noise it up or vice versa?
It depends. I mean, I think it's case by case basis. In some cases, I'll bring stuff in that I know it's too melodic and pretty, but I don't know how. And then I'm like, and I know Brian's going to be able to make it sound way worse. So uh, I'm sort of expecting him to shit on it a little bit to make it sound cooler, because I don't even think that I trust his instinct, and I trust myself, but I also know that stuff that I do 100% on my own just isn't as good as stuff that has input from other people. So a lot of it is mostly just about trusting each other and knowing that you know it's none of this stuff is objective, it's all subjective, it's all about taste. And so something that feels right to me isn't like objectively right. And
Right.
so I trust that somebody else's opinions about a thing, and like maybe they're like, oh, I hear the one where it feels like the two to you, and it's like, okay, cool, then let's see how that works when we try to put it all together.
Right.
So if that makes any sense.
Yeah, 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 of course, man. I mean, it sounds like you guys have a very open, collaborative thing, whatever you call it,
Yeah.
relationship, which is
Yeah.
helpful, obviously,
Yeah.
being a band.
For
Um,
sure.
I mean, has there been any major fights about that, or you just hash it out and then move on?
Not really fights. I don't think we've ever had a fight about anything like that. I mean, there's been times when I think we all try to make an effort not to do this, but there have been times when any one of us has maybe gotten a little bit too precious about a particular riff, or about the way something, sounded in our heads, and then it not turning out that way. And so
Mm.
maybe get a little bit grumpy that, I really had this idea for this thing, and it just turned out, 180 degrees from what I was expecting. And so sometimes maybe there's some pouting, but I wouldn't say that there's ever any fighting. And then,
Right, right.
like I said earlier, sometimes my solution to instead of pouting, is I'll just get kind of like childish and just try to intentionally destroy some, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's also the reality of being in a band, and I guess it's, if you someone who's just starting out, it's gonna be, you're gonna have ideas you think it's gonna be one thing, but then it turns out it's gonna be something else. But it's all the
Yeah.
betterment of the song, I guess, which is a hard thing to learn, I guess.
Yeah. And that's what we ultimately, all of us are kind of focused on: what's going to make the best song,
Mm-hmm.
not what's going to make me feel the most validated,
Hmm.
you know? Um, and, but yeah, I mean, I think the same thing happens even in the context of, not even just in the band, but like in your own personal stuff. Sometimes you have to be less precious about your approach. So
Hmm. Yeah, exactly, man. I mean, I think you can also hear that in your band. Like, you can hear it's all about the song. It's not about individuals shining, so to speak. So,
yeah, that's also just because we're not really very good at playing our instruments. So
I,
it's not possible for us to shine.
I wouldn't say so, man. You guys are pretty awesome, But yeah, it's awesome that the song is at the forefront,
It's all, yeah, yeah, definitely, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've talked about with I think somebody else who definitely focuses really strongly on the song. And sometimes it's like, yeah, this riff might be really repetitive, or really kind of not that, no one's going to be like, oh, I got to figure out the tab to that riff because it's just like two notes or whatever. But I think Horrors does the same thing. Those guys just approach it about, how are we going to make the most effective, most efficient song, whether or not like this individual riff is like the thing that people, want to brag to their friends about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's the issue.
Yeah.
So yeah, we definitely try to focus on that as much as possible.
Right. I mean, because I heard you also were very influenced by Metallica. Obviously, they're not I mean, they changed the style mid, or early '90s to simpler, me being more about the song.
Yeah.
Was that something you took away from Metallica too, or what was the thing that
Uh,
inspired you?
uh, it was. I would say that the earlier, more complicated music is that's a stronger influence. Like sort of Ride the Lightning era, all the way through. I mean, I love Kill 'Em All, of course, but the first four records are really the ones that influenced me the most. I mean, that was right as I started playing guitar, is kind of when I was really listening to those records a lot, and I went through and figured out, I think, pretty much every single James riff from Ride the Lightning, just start to finish, by just sitting with the tape and rewinding it, just figured out all of them by ear. So it's just that kind of approach to rhythm guitar,
Right.
and and just the sort of like the they were a metal band, but they had, I think, a pretty punk attitude about their approach to the whole world of music. And people wrote about it plenty of times that they became very popular without ever working to have any kind of radio hit, and they just wore like jeans and t-shirt for the first 20 years or whatever. That they weren't like the typical, we're gonna have this uniform or whatever as a metal band. So I think it's more about that kind of stuff. It's about the attitude and the approach to just like, who gives a shit about what other people think or what they see when they see us on stage. It's just, we're going to do the thing that feels right to us. And they
Yeah.
had this sort of like energy and aggression that I think we can all relate to
Yeah.
still.
Yeah. Exactly, man. I mean, did you also get to meet James and the guys in Metallica? Do you guys play like the Orion Festival thing?
We did. We met. So that was, even remember what year that was. It was pretty early. It was maybe 2010 or something.
What?
Uh, and maybe it was 2011, but we drove across the country to Atlantic City. Had the night before was a pretty nutty night. We stayed in a really disgusting, kind of scary motel outside of Atlantic City, and then rolled in at like 10 in the morning, and we're all out of our minds. And the whole way out, we were just, like, there's no way that Metallica themselves actually chose us to play this thing. I'm sure it's just like somebody as part of their giant team was like, oh, this is a band that, their videos are, the kids like their videos, so let's have them on this thing. And I think we'd all agreed, like, the only way we're going to believe that Metallica has even heard of us is like if James comes over and introduces himself or whatever. And it's probably about 6-7 minutes before we're supposed to go on, and I was like stretching some. We were all spread around, just like stretching and getting ready. And then Chris Coyle, our tour manager, kind of runs over to each of us, and he's all kind of breathless, and he's like, "Guys, everybody needs to come over and gather, backstage over in the spot, because 5 minutes before you guys go on, James Hetfield's going to come over and say hi." And then we're all suddenly just like, "Oh fuck," because I think that you'll hear this from a lot of people, like
Right.
that most musicians who get, have been doing it as long as we have, or, have gotten to the sort of like low mid level of recognition that we have, you kind of get over your starstruck thing,
Right. Right.
because you realize that it's just it's just a bunch of your peers.
Right.
But you'll hear in the same breath, you'll also hear people say, the one person that I think I might still be starstruck by is James Hetfield.
Right. Right.
And I've heard that quite a few times, and it turns out that is also true of me. That when I met him, I just totally like whited out, and I barely remember some of it. And the first couple songs, I was in the wrong tuning, and I was fucking up real bad.
Right. Right.
And they also, they were also headlining the Soundwave Festival when we played that in Australia,
Right.
and they hosted, like, before the tour started, the night before, Metallica hosted this like barbecue for the entire tour, which
Right.
was, I think, 55 bands and all their crews. So I mean, it was like whatever that, hundreds and hundreds of people. And James, I guess, remembered us, and I saw he was chatting with John and Brian.
Right.
And I was talking to some friend of mine, and I was like, oh, there's James Hetfield talking to my band. And so I just totally sleep deprived, just flown all the way from the U.S. And I remember kind of running over and being probably that guy that I just started kind of like yelling at him, and I was just so excited
Yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of overdid it a little bit, but got some pretty good stories about the early days of touring. So it was fun.
I can
I hope I
imagine.
didn't embarrass myself too much.
Well, no, no, no. I mean, I'm sure you didn't, but I can totally understand if that's how you
Yeah,
felt. you know?
yeah,
I mean, yeah. I mean, I just this for me, I would probably react the same way, maybe even worse. Uh,
yeah.
but it's nice also that the Metallica crew, whatever you want to call the family, like they say, I guess, does take care of like you guys, and they seem to have that vibe. Um,
Oh, sure.
you know,
Yeah. I mean, I think that they can relate and understand, even though it's been 30 whatever, however many years that they've been touring on planes, and that they aren't connected really to the touring in a van lifestyle anymore, but they totally get it and
mm,
can relate. And so like that Orion festival, that was one of the best backstage artist areas. We were super well cared for,
mm,
because they, as artists, they understand how important it is to especially if you've just driven all the way across the country in a van and spent the night, in a crappy motel where you got almost no sleep, to have some sort of like, maybe somebody should actually treat you like you're kind of important, since you're the one who people are showing up to see your band, that maybe instead of being treated just like cattle to be pushed out on stage and then
right.
pulled back off so that the crew can get their work done in
Mm,
a more efficient manner, which some places you play, it kind of feels like that. It sort of feels like the production team you're just in their way,
right,
you
right,
know.
right. Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
Metallica definitely understands, like, no, you guys need to be respected and treated well.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear, man. But Red Fang. I mean, you guys are a band. I mean, I know for me, and I think I'm speaking for a lot of people. It's a band that bands look up to. Other bands look up to. Like you guys, you are releasing records, touring, playing with great bands like you've said, Metallica or Mastodon, etc. But to get to that point, in your band's career, what were some of the sacrifices you had to make to achieve that success?
I mean, the biggest one is just not being home as much for my son as he was growing up.
Right.
The last couple of years, I've been home a lot more, and we've actually had he's 11 now, but
Mm.
sort of early on was when the band was really touring a ton, and so I was not there for quite a bit of his earlier childhood.
Mm.
And then the other thing is, it's actually like pretty hard to maintain um, deep friendships at home,
Right.
because if they're constantly interrupted, I mean, you have lots of friends all around the world, but it seems like your friend circle of the sort of like really, really important friends just shrinks like crazy,
Right.
because you just don't, you can't spend as much time with people. So uh, I have more superficial relationships now, I guess, I mean, I'm lucky in that I have a very, very good relationship with my wife,
Mm.
and I do have good friends that I stay in touch with. But that's kind of like being able to actually hang out with your friends and family is really the biggest sacrifice. And for some people, their friends and family are just the people they're on the road with all the time, and that's true for me to some extent. But I also have like pretty deep connections with people back home, so
Right.
that's the biggest sacrifice for sure.
Right. 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 Yeah, it makes sense, man. I mean, I'm because I'm from Sweden originally, and having moved here to London, it's not the same sort of sacrifice, but you do miss a lot of family stuff that you wish you could have flown home to, or etc. etc. So yeah, it can definitely be painful. So
Yeah,
I definitely understand what you mean.
yeah.
But how is it being on the road, being a new up and coming band? You know, being in a van. What's that life like?
Uh, well, I mean, in the beginning, it's extremely exciting. I mean, I'd done only one tour at all before before I started playing in Red Fang. And I think that Red Fang started when I was like 35 or something. So I was super excited just to be on the road at all. Uh, since I had so many friends who had been doing it for so long and I'd never done it, and it sounded very exciting, and it was. So, in the beginning, we're playing shows to like 3 people, and that just the fact that we were out and about, like I was just stoked to be doing it, and was never like, I was always grateful for the opportunity to even do it at all, whether or not the shows were, super awesome. Uh, and then it was about 2 years in or so, it kind of felt like, oh, maybe it wasn't quite that long. Maybe it was like a year and a half in. It sort of felt like the band started kind of petering out a little bit. I'd gotten a new job, and my ex-wife, my kid's mom, was pregnant, and it just felt like things were kind of moving towards this, like, oh, we're all settling down kind of thing. And then the video came out, and then since then, it was just like 5 or 6 years straight of just upward trajectory.
Right. What video
And
was that, you mean?
it was the Prehistoric Dog video.
Right,
Was
right.
the very first one that we did.
Right.
And it was, like, we've talked about this a bunch, that the first European headlining tour we did, we had gotten offered a US tour with Mastodon at the end of, I think it was the end of 2010 or 9 or so. I can't remember what year it was. I guess maybe it was the end of 2010.
Right.
And they just liked us enough that they then offered us their upcoming European tour, and that was in like January. And we already had been booking our first European headlining tour, and we did that Mastodon tour, and then suddenly the headlining tour, just like all of a sudden a bunch of the shows were sold out. But that tour, it was us and Black Tusk.
Right.
There was 5 of us, 4 of them, and our friend Whitey, who shot the first couple of videos. Well, he shot most of our videos. He wanted to come along and do some documentary stuff, so he was there with us too.
Right.
And our driver and his girlfriend for like the first week in a splitter van.
What's a splitter van?
And so it was like, it's that van where it's like, it's a Sprinter that has a loft built into the back. So it only has I think 2 benches.
Right.
And then 2 bucket seats in the front. So there was like 12 of us in that van.
Yeah.
And there was a bunch of times when we had to do overnight drives where we were like trying to sleep. Like Brian was sleeping in the wheel well, and Chris Coyle, who's huge, was like tucking himself underneath the first bench. And I mean, it was by all accounts fucking miserable, but none of us cared because we were just so excited about, like, we're doing our first headlining tour of Europe, and these shows are awesome, and it's so exciting to be over here. Like, if we tried to do that today, we would all probably die.
Right.
But there's just this thing about the adrenaline of that stuff happening, because all of us, we were all in our mid to late 30s when this band started really happening, and had all been playing music to very low levels of recognition or success for years and years and years. And so even though we're like too old to be doing that kind of stuff, just the adrenaline and excitement of like, holy shit, this is actually finally happening, where it's like, I can actually come home with money, and there's people at these shows, and they're like, I remember playing our first European tour was opening for The Ocean, and flying to, we played a show in Athens, Greece, that we had to fly to, and we'd played 2 shows the day that we flew, and then had to go straight to the airport from Bremen at like 3 a.m, and then fly down to Athens, and then we flew back again at 3 the next morning. It was just 24 hours in Athens, and I was just, of course, out of my mind. And then we're playing it, started playing the show, and people are like singing along with Prehistoric Dog, and I was like, what the hell is going?
Yeah.
That we're in the middle of, like, I can't, like just took so much effort to get here, and to think that people like this far away actually knew our
Yeah.
songs well enough to sing along. It was just like that. And there's a few other moments where it was just like, oh shit, this is like something different. This is definitely not the same kind of like crappy band that my friends are politely saying is good, you know. It's so, yeah, it's like, it's kind of like a, you know, indescribably exciting,
Mm.
positive feeling to go through that kind of thing, especially I think given how late it happened for all of us.
Yeah, and that's super interesting. Um, so, what do you think, or why do you think it happened later? I mean, it's all relative, I guess, but why do you think it happened maybe later than many other bands?
I think mainly because all of our previous bands were kind of crappy,
Right,
and so I mean that's really the simple answer is just that we weren't, none of the other bands we were in before were really all that good.
right.
Um, that's not entirely true. Some of the bands that the other guys were in were actually pretty awesome, but I think some of it is also just luck,
Hmm.
and and also paying attention to opportunities when they come, and actually like taking advantage of if somebody offers you something, that maybe listen to them instead of just blowing it off, or like return people's emails
Right,
and
right,
phone.
right.
It's like pretty simple stuff that some people just don't do, like they just don't have their shit together. There's
Hmm.
a lot of really great bands that I've known who never really uh they didn't go as far as you expected they would, and I think a lot of it is just that they weren't as confident in themselves
Hmm.
as they should have been, and so they weren't taking seriously other people's offers to, I could do this thing for you if you just give me a chance.
Right.
So I think that's part of it, and then it's also
Hmm.
that thing where you're talking about earlier, just like the way that our songwriting works and the way that our songs sound is just a lucky thing that happens when the four of us get together, and
Hmm.
that's kind of beyond any of our control.
Right.
And it's just the thing that made our music just resonate with people in a way that any of us individually couldn't do.
Hmm. I mean, yeah, it's super interesting. So, what were some of the things? Because you said something along the lines of listening to advice, etc., that you might not have done before. Do you remember any advice that was sort of pivotal to your career?
Well, it wasn't necessarily advice. It was more like the particular thing that I'm thinking of is, in our case, that kind of stands out the most is we played a show pretty early on in Oakland with some friends of ours called Saviors.
Right.
And this there was this lady who came up and introduced herself at the merch table and was like, "You guys are great. I don't know if you guys have a manager, if you'd ever be interested in that kind of thing." And uh, I guess I maybe gave her my email address or gave her the band email, and then she wrote to us and wrote this email. It was like, "Hey, we met at that. I'm friends with Saviors, and that's why I was in town, but I'm from LA, and blah 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 blah."
Was that
And
Sergeant
I think
House or
no, this wasn't Sergeant House. This is
right?
before. I think it was maybe even before that.
Right. Right.
And I had looked at the email and just thought, I mean, it was like our like 15th show or something. I was like, manager. I just was like, laughed, and I thought it was a joke basically.
Hmm.
And then yeah, then the Sergeant House thing happened because our friend Rob McConaughey, who made that Prehistoric Dog video, he was working for Kathy's
Right. Right.
production
Right.
company, and so he said, "I think you guys should talk to Kathy about this."
Hmm.
And I think in the past, maybe we would have been like, like that's whatever. Nobody's going to care about that stuff. And it was just like, why not? And then talk to her, and then she had all these ideas, and it was like, okay, I'm going to, we're going to trust you and trust that the reason that you're excited about this, and then just trusting her and letting her actually help us led to us getting this booking agent, which none of us had ever been in a band that had a booking agent. That made a big difference.
Hmm.
Immediately, there was a huge difference in the way that our shows went. And then a couple years later, we're recording with Chris Funk for our second record, and he was like, "Hey, I think that maybe you guys should talk to," because we had a one record deal with Sargent House,
Right. Right.
and he was trying to help shop our record around. and it wasn't working. And he was like, maybe you guys should talk to my friend Laurel. She used to manage the Decemberists, and I think she might be able to help find this record a home. And so he contacted her, and then she was like, oh yeah, don't you remember I wrote you an email after that show in Oakland with the Stagers? And I was like, oh my God, wait, what? So it was one of those things where it was like, even in that moment, if I just, if I paid attention and like actually trusted that we maybe are good enough to deserve somebody, offering their help as a manager. I mean, that obviously ended up working out, but that's one of those, that was the moment that I was like, okay, this is evidence that you should actually just like listen to people sometimes when they offer you these sorts of things, instead of just, being all up in your own head and like not trusting anybody. So,
right. That's a good example, man.
Yeah.
But something that's also really interesting is the whole, like you mentioned it, like the video Prehistoric Dog, because I remember seeing that and I was like, oh shit, what's this, So what had to come together for that to happen? I mean, did you guys know that it was going to be what it became, or was it just our friend has a funny idea, let's shoot it?
It was, everybody else, Brian, David, and John had a band called Party Time before Red Fang. And Rob is an old friend of ours. He used to shoot a bunch of snowboard stuff, and he worked for Big Brother, which eventually became the sort of Jackass people, and he shot a bunch of the Jackass movie stuff, and a lot of the like really crazy ideas were his ideas. And he'd been doing music videos for a while, and a lot of his videos are like really, really cool. And so Party Time had been bugging him to do a video for years, and he just kind of kept blowing them off. And then we, sorry, I'm going to take a little cough drop.
No worries, man.
We wrote that song Prehistoric Dog, and essentially the moment we wrote it, we all knew like, oh, this is just like, this is on a kind of different level from the rest of the songs that we've written so far.
Right.
And he obviously could hear that as well. And so he approached us and said, I have this idea. I think he just constantly has a list of video ideas. And he had that one already, and then he heard that song, and he was like, this is the perfect song for this idea that I have. And he approached us, and we said, that sounds awesome. We wanted you to do a video forever. And this is early in the days of YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
And our friend Charlie had this video. He had a one-man band called Panther.
Right.
And Whitey had done this video of him, like everything made out of cardboard. Like he had his whole apartment was all cardboard. He had a little cardboard record player and cardboard headphones and a cardboard, bed. It was, that video was so good.
Right.
And I remember thinking, if there's just any way that our video could get, I think it had like 25,000 views or something. And I was like, if our video can just get 25,000 views, I'll be just so excited and stoked. And we got to 25, and then suddenly we got to 50, and I was like, and that was like it was almost, that was the moment when I really felt like, oh, this is something that's like something different and a little bit more than just like me playing for my friends in the basement.
Right. That's cool, man.
Yeah.
I mean, was that the main thing, how you built the fan base, like when you started out? Because obviously there was more videos that came that were also really popular. Is that the main channel, so to speak, that you increased the fan base, or?
Absolutely. I mean, it was, yeah. I mean, that was, like I said, when we went to Athens, Greece, and there was people singing along with that song. And then, the next couple tours, like Wires,
yeah,
I think was equally popular as a video. And in fact, there were people, I was pretty surprised when we went on the tour after that record came out that people would mention our video. And I always thought they were talking about Prehistoric Dog, but a lot of people had never even seen that one, and they'd only seen the Wires one. So I think that one kind of stuck with people too. And in the very early days, it was MySpace. We were just doing everything MySpace, and lots of interaction with, anytime anybody wrote us a message on MySpace, one of us would reply. Anytime anybody wrote us an email, we would reply. That's kind of getting back to that thing I was saying earlier. It's like, actually just reply to people when they write to you. If they're taking the time, this is something that I learned from Bob Weston, actually, who's an old friend of mine from Shellac. He was like, we reply to every single email that anybody ever writes to Shellac, because if they care enough to take the time out of their day to write you an email, it's just the least you can do to have the respect to write back to them. Because it doesn't take that much time, and it's like, it's a pretty special thing that they care enough to do that. And so I took that was kind of my model for how to interact with people through the internet. And it was, MySpace made it easier. Like, I honestly have never understood Facebook, and I had an account for like 6 months pretty early on and canceled it. And I just I'm pretty happy that I just happened to not, I'd gone through the Friendster. I went Friendster and then MySpace and then Facebook, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. And so, but yeah, it was basically the video and just kind of promoting that through our MySpace page. We were still, in those days, we were still just like making copies of CDs, on our computers and like bringing them and then like writing on them with Sharpie to sell at shows. And, and it was Kathy at Sargent House who said, don't send another run of CDs to the local printing place. Let me put your next CD out and we'll do it for real. But yeah, it was definitely MySpace promotion, like the birth of YouTube, and that video. That was like, I mean, I think it's fair to say that there's something real behind all of that stuff, but that was what made it possible for like people in Moscow to find out who we were, because we just don't have a powerful enough, PR team. There's not enough money behind what we're doing, because we're not ever going to be popular enough to like promote us in that way in places like Russia or Portugal or Indonesia or whatever. It's the fact that the internet is so accessible. People can see you and hear you anywhere in the world. So
I mean, yes, sorry, go ahead.
Honest, like being able to download music for free and listen to stuff without any kind of risk. We were like huge proponents of like, please take our music for free, because the more people that can hear us, the more chance we have of like going all over the place and being able to sell T-shirts. And T-shirts is where you really make your money anyway.
Yeah. I mean, well said. I think that's a lot of bands. I think they learned that, maybe 10, 15 years ago, that giving your music away for free in the beginning can be a good thing.
Yeah,
definitely. But what impact did Kathy also have on the Red Fang? Like, how did she take you from maybe a smaller band to a bigger band?
Well, I mean, a lot of it was finding us a booking agent right off the bat, and immediately getting us on a tour with Clutch.
Oh, okay, cool.
And so the way that, I mean, these are things that none of us had any understanding of whatsoever when we first started playing music, and even when we first started playing with Red Fang. But so much of the way the stuff works in the kind of booking agent world, and that whole world, is that it's about like, oh, this is that band toured with Clutch. That means that they're viable for doing these other two, suddenly go from being an unknown band to a band that has toured with Clutch. And then now you can be a band that is, now you're legitimate, and you're worthy of consideration for other kinds of bigger tours or festivals and stuff like that. So that was the biggest. It's just her kind of like breaking through that barrier of like, we're self-promoting, we book our own tours, into a band that's like in the kind of like industry now.
Right. That's awesome, actually.
Yeah.
I have some friends who also been talking about the same thing, how they're trying to find a booking agent, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of cool to hear what the benefits are with that.
Yeah. It just puts you on the radar of the people who book the shows that you want to, be playing. And we didn't have any idea that that's the way that it was. I mean, everything that we did was just through friends of ours, So like, and it still happens that way sometimes, when there's certain things that there's sometimes our manager or our agent don't know some of the people that we know just from our personal relationships, that You'd be like, hey, can you reach out to,
Mm-hmm.
so and so from whatever band and see if maybe that could be a thing. And
Right.
so we still do that ourselves too.
Yeah.
And that definitely helps. That's a big thing is, having been around as long as we all have and starting as old as we were, having, played music, been in the music world for like 20 years before we started
Mm-hmm.
really touring a lot. We just already knew a bunch of people in
Right.
the
Right.
heavy music world.
But like you said before, like Red Fang came about a bit later. How did you like? Did you have a normal job in the meantime? Did you ever wonder like, oh, maybe the music thing will it happen? Did you have those moments and doubts, maybe?
Uh, in the beginning, I had not really a normal job, but I had a regular, like a job that I went to regularly. I worked for the puppet fabrication department of a stop motion animation studio,
Cool.
which I had no previous experience with, but I just had a friend who worked there, and she kind of like she got me the job. And I'd done like in the beginning of Red Fang, I think I was doing construction work. I was like a handyman, and I've had lots of jobs. I started out, I have a degree in biology, and I worked in
Cool.
laboratories. I started working in my dad's lab when I was 15. So
That's pretty cool, man.
yeah, but the transition, uh, John and Brian were both working at a bar.
Hmm.
They had been bartenders or barbacks for years and years and years, and I was working out at the stop motion studio.
Hmm.
And I was on my second movie, and I think my son was like 2 years old or something at this point, and we got these offers for some pretty big festival tours. One was a month long in March, and then, or maybe it was April or whatever, and then there was another one that was like July through most of August. It was a 6-week tour, and the production was like, "There's no way you can be gone that long and come back to a job." It's the
Right.
kind of, when you do a movie like that, like they get mad if you want to take one day off,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
here I am asking for like 3 months off. So, and those guys were like, "I probably can't go back to a job at the bar if I'm going to be asking for this much time off," because it was a very popular bar they worked at.
Right.
So we were all real nervous about, if we're going to do these tours, we have to quit our jobs. And none of us has ever done that. None of us had any expectation to be able to make a living playing music or be able to support ourselves. I had a 2-year-old son. My, son's mom wasn't really working so much at the time because I was doing all the work and she was raising him.
Right. Right.
So it's pretty nerve wracking. But two things gave us, I guess, the confidence to do it. One, we had a fairly steady upward trajectory, and and this is just like a super lucky thing about us, is that we actually never lost money on a tour up to that point. I mean, we didn't make a ton of money, but we like at least broke even on every tour. And there's a couple tours that, totally self-booked, like from the beginning. We just would somehow sold enough CDs and t-shirts that we would just come home with like at least a little bit of money. So we're like, let's have confidence in ourselves. And the other thing that happened that honestly made all the difference was that our manager had secured this like sponsorship with a drink company. And so we actually got a big pile of cash, and they were like, we'll cover a bunch of your expenses so that you can do this tour. Without that, I don't know that we would have been able to do it. So
Right. That's pretty cool. You can get a sponsorship like that.
yeah,
Is that usual with bands and
I
stuff?
don't think it happens as much anymore. I think
Right.
that 10 years ago was more of a thing, but I think that money is kind of like starting to disappear. In Europe, it seems like, especially Sweden, a lot of bands that we've talked to there, it's like talking to Graveyard, like, how did you guys, went from no one's ever heard of you to like, you're so like, I'm already so good, They're like, well, it's kind of not really fair, because in Sweden, we basically get money from the government to spend an entire year just getting really good. All we do is practice for a whole year
Right.
before
Right.
we
Right.
start touring, because there's like the government actually values
Right, right.
the arts,
Mm-hmm.
and so
Mm-hmm.
there's support, financial support for trying to do some artistic endeavor, which is not the case in the U.S.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
you have to sort of find things like that, like find sponsorships from corporations.
Right. I mean, because I have some friends, who are really good at playing their instrument, do music, um, and like you guys in the beginning, they also have to have quote unquote normal jobs.
Yeah.
So how do you guys still how do you guys still get together or got together and wrote music so you could progress to that level? Because obviously, I guess a lot of you were tired after the works, like, oh, maybe
Yeah.
I can't be asked. So how did you guys kept doing it and pushing yourself?
Well, that was, I mean, the simple answer is there was no effort involved. It wasn't
Right,
like,
right,
oh, I have to
right, right.
want to write me. It was just like, all I could do, I was just waiting for my job to be over so I could go practice, because I had, was so excited about these ideas about the things that we were doing in practice that I couldn't wait to go to practice.
Mm,
And because it was the release from the day, it was like,
right.
uh, it was the thing that I was thinking. It was my creative outlet for when I was doing construction stuff. It was fun, but music has always been my creative outlet. And similarly in the puppet department, I'm just like looking at a bunch of spreadsheets, and organizing stuff. I'm not making anything.
Right, right, right.
And so in my head, I'm just thinking about these riffs and like, oh, maybe that part could go with that one. And I just want, just about getting home and trying it as soon as I can. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it was not a challenge at all. There was no part of it that seemed difficult. It was, the only thing was just like, can we practice? Why can't we
Right, right,
practice
right.
more? You
Makes
know?
makes total sense, man.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I think you definitely need to have that drive or passion, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Or it definitely makes it easier, I guess.
Yeah. It actually it gets harder once you don't have a job, because then, ultimately you kind of have, there's nothing that you're trying to get away from.
Mhm.
And you have sort of like, it's the luxury and the curse of so much freedom and time that you're like, I can do that later,
Right, right.
and you're not like trying to escape anything. So it's just, there's like, it's a funny, weird, backwards thing.
But so would you say you guys are more disciplined now? Like, so you actually have to commit more to the band and the music?
Yeah, for sure. I think that it takes a little bit more effort for us to get together, because, uh, well, and also just like anything, once you've done something long enough, it's not new anymore, and so you're not like, oh, I'm so excited to discover these things. It's more like, okay, let's just keep this ball rolling. And although the newer stuff that we've just started doing in our sort of like distance composition is like, it does feel kind of different from what we've done before. So
Right.
maybe in a bad way, but we'll see.
But so, yeah, so during this pandemic, is that what you have had to do then? Like sending
Yeah,
riffs
we've had,
back and forth?
exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm 2.5 hours away from Portland. So
Right, right.
yeah, it's just like emailing stuff back and forth.
Right. I mean, so what is the future for Red Fang now then? Like, are you just going to ride out the pandemic and go back on the road or release a new
I mean,
album?
that's the plan. We have the new album already totally done.
Ah, cool.
Artwork, like everything, it was scheduled to come out end of May.
Hmm.
And it was that poor timing, but
Right.
luckily it was like, we actually had enough time to just be like, okay, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to hold on to it until it's safe to tour again. So we're just kind of waiting until it gets, until we're allowed to fly to other countries.
Yeah.
And so probably sometime next year. I think we already have a tour that's sort of like being booked in Europe for August.
Oh, cool.
But no guarantees. We just have to see how it goes. But
Yeah,
yeah,
man.
that's the plan. And then meanwhile, trying to write more music so we're ready for the next round after that.
Right. Awesome, man. I mean, so
Yeah.
what do you guys usually do between tours? Is it just going back to writing more music, or do you have other commitments you do, or any other interests?
No, that's pretty much, I mean, my uh, kids in school and my wife lives 2.5 hours from Portland. So for me, in the past, it's been a lot of just like travel back and forth and catching up with family and friends, and yeah, and then writing when we can. But there's no like real commitments aside from just trying to make sure that we stay connected with the people who aren't inside of the Red Fang family.
Right. That
Yeah.
makes sense, man. But Aaron, it was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing everything.
Thank
For
you.
being open. It was a pleasure talking to you. Yeah, so thank you for
You as
coming
well.
on.
It was my pleasure.
Awesome, man. Thank you, Aaron, for coming on. It was a real pleasure talking to you, and hope you, the listener, enjoyed it as well. Feel free to let me know in the comments what you think, if there's any particular thing we talked about that you want to discuss further. If there's any guests you want to see coming onto the show, let me know. And feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are consuming this show. Also, before you leave, if you want exclusive access to interviews before the public or a chance to submit questions to upcoming guests, join the Audio Tribe. It's free to send your name and email address. You have joined. But that's it. It was awesome having you here this week, and I will see you next week again. So take care.